Welcome to TG2Chat Live, the video live stream of Teachers Going Gradeless. I'm Arthur Chiaravalli, co-founder of Teachers Going Gradeless. My guest today is Sherri Spelic. Sherri teaches elementary physical education at American International School in Vienna. She has written extensively on topics related to education, identity, and power, and among other things, publishes a monthly social justice newsletter for educators called Bending the Arc. She is also the author of a recent book called Care at the Core. I first ran across Sherri's writing 3 or 4 years ago and was immediately taken by her ability to connect so many dots in education and to imagine its role in moving us toward a more just and inclusive future. Sherri moves in a lot of pedagogical circles, so it's hard to put a single hashtag on her writing. In her book, she expresses her wish, borrowing from the words of Audrey Waters, to be a node in a network of learners. And for me and for so many others, Sherri has been just that. A few years ago, I contributed a piece to her online publication, Education, Identity, and Power. And a few weeks ago, I reached out to her to see if she'd be willing to return the favor for TG2. The result is one of my favorite TG2 pieces of all time, Making Awesome the Standard. Sherri, I'm so glad to have you with us here today.
Hello, Arthur. Thank you for having me. That was a wonderful intro.
Well, you're welcome. You're a wonderful person, and I'm just so happy that we've finally had a chance to meet face to face. Hopefully, we'll be able to do this in person someday.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be great? But I'm going to go over a couple quick housekeeping items because we are having a drawing for a couple signed copies of Sherri's book, Care at the Core. So follow the shortened link that I just displayed, bit.ly, TG2 drawing, and that is case sensitive, and you can enter to win there. Also remember that at the end of our interview, our Patreon supporters will be joining us for a Zoom after party where we'll have a chance to talk further with Sherri. We'd like to give a shout out to our most recent supporter, John Stevens. Thank you so much, John. Hope we'll see you there. And you too can become a Patreon supporter and help us keep the lights on at TG2 by going to patreon.com/gradeless. So one more thing, I do want to encourage you to chime in. You are many places. People are on Facebook, people are on YouTube, people are on Twitter. So I can't see all those things at once, but I want you to chime in with questions and comments for Sherri throughout. I may display those as we go or save them to the end. We may have time to discuss those as we go or at the end of the interview. If you're out there, we'd love for you to chime in and share it as we go. Okay, so I am going to open up the comments and let's jump right in, Sherri.
Okay.
I heard that your family had a little bit of a brush with COVID over the last week or so, and I just want to acknowledge that, knowing that is in the space for so many of us in education right now, but I'm hearing things are better.
Things are better, yes. My teen had COVID. Now it's been 2 weeks and recovered well. He had both shots, but he definitely was down for about 3 days. And in that experience, I feel like we really were very fortunate. But we also had access to lots of testing and a lot of things that I know not everyone has the same privileges.
Right. Well, that's good to hear. I'm very glad to hear that. I do want to talk about your book, Care at the Core, which I have my copy of right here. And I have to say, I've so enjoyed poring over these essays of yours again. The last of these essays was written in 2019. And there are some threads that weave their way through the entirety of this book. And I think through your writing generally, again, identity, education, and power, but also the writing process. Questions around social media and public identities that come out of that, and how communities form or don't form in those spaces. And, a lot has transpired since 2019. A bit of an understatement. And I'm wondering which of those themes for you, and maybe it's an essay in particular that continues to resonate with you in your reading and your thinking and your writing as we've been in this age of COVID?
That is such a great question that I wish I was better prepared for, because it really is, when I think of, what are the themes that I'm constantly sort of working with and through. Um, I think really the last 2 years have been wrestling with notions of interdependence. I understand that, but of course I'm asking it, well, why don't more folks get that? Why are we so stuck on this individualistic piece? And of course, capitalism, and all those hierarchies and all the stuff that ties into that. But I think in terms of writing, I keep coming back to trying to understand. Okay, so if I have a whole population that's saying no, nah, interdependence, nah, y'all can keep that. Um, how do I work with the folks who are cognizant and willing and working towards that? And how do we sort of sustain each other? Um, and what can we do with that? What are the things that we can still claim, that we can still change and yeah, so I think that's kind of, I think this notion of interdependence and bringing, I don't know if it's bringing folks in, but I think it's this both. It's both sustaining who's already here and maybe attracting those who are curious and who are thinking, oh, maybe I can think differently about this stuff. So yeah.
No, I totally agree, and I feel like you are still speaking to us in 2022. I mean, as I read these essays over over our wind chill day, I felt like they were still so relevant. You know, I think one of the reasons that you're an edu hero of mine is that you're continually reminding me to stay curious, to keep listening, to keep learning, and listening as a way of creating that community. And I think that I heard that a little bit in what you just shared about a thread that's still there for you, but the openness to the people who are not yet here, in some ways that door remains open through a willingness to be curious, a willingness to listen, a willingness to keep learning. Not to say that people who are unwilling to care for others are, they have necessarily something to teach us, but I feel like you model that so often. And it's what you call in your book a learning life well lived. And I wondered if we could jump into your book now.
Okay.
If you would mind reading, I think, a beautiful passage from your book where you define that learning life well lived. And for those of you who have the book, it is the first paragraph at the top of page 201. Would you read that passage for us?
Gladly. All right. With my writing, I want to make a strong case for leading a broad and open learning life from the cradle to the grave. A learning life that edifies and delights us, that fills us with marvel and fertilizes our curiosity. That's the learning life I dream of for all of us. A learning life that stands in stark contrast to the neoliberal economic imperative of lifelong learning, which may sound the same, but implies learning for the sake of remaining employable in order to generate yet more wealth for the 1%. No, my vision of a learning life well lived has entirely different aims.
I love that so much. And it does bring up this question of assessment, because when you talk about how can we know that has happened, and you go on to say, actually, in the next paragraph, I would love for us to be able to hold up our learning lives as testament to growth and development toward better outcomes for everybody, toward economic justice, toward inclusive societies, toward equitable opportunities and care, toward toward environmental preservation and stewardship, toward a world we dream of for our children and our grandchildren's children. And what I hear in that being able to hold up, that you say, as we say in assessment, that's like demonstrate or provide evidence of, and then better outcomes for everybody. Again, another assessment word, outcomes.
Mm.
You're saying that the outcome most worth demonstrating and assessing is the outcome that makes outcomes better for everybody. And that is,
That's what I would
yeah.
love to see, and I feel like when I think about what I do with kids, what I really want, I want them to see. So I think part of what I'm actually doing is I want to sharpen their vision. I want them to be able to recognize things that are happening, things that are going on. And so it means that I take time for different things, meaning that my priorities, yes, I'm a physical education teacher, and yes, we're working on physical skills, throwing, catching, kicking, uh, climbing, swinging, all of these things. But when we're always doing that with each other, with other people, like it's not like I have one-on-one lessons, right? So we're, 15, 20 kids moving. Maybe we're playing a game, we're trying to interact with each other. And when we do that, what I want kids to be able to do is to also recognize we're playing the game, but what's going on in the game? Who is doing what? When people come to me and say, "Oh, that wasn't fair. The teams weren't fair," and I'll say, "Well, okay, who made those teams? How did we decide on how those teams would be formed?" And usually, it's something that I've put into their hands, and so this is the work of helping students to recognize their own agency, their own how their own interests may not jive very well with the interest of the larger group, and that sometimes we have
Mhm.
to maybe change or reshape our own interest to sort of make a group thing happen. And so I feel like the effort that I put is into developing their awareness that it's their decisions that impact our experience. And so in terms
Mhm.
of assessment, what I'm watching and looking for is what do they see
Mhm.
in their experience? What can they recognize? Can they recognize their own roles in those experiences? Can they acknowledge when they've done things that were maybe the opposite of what we talked about we wanted? Like
Mhm. Yeah.
like, many times kids say, "Oh, we want the game to be fair," but then in the game, they recognize, "Well, I can create an advantage for me and my 2 friends if we team up and do this other thing."
Mhm.
And so and then we can talk about that.
Yeah.
And actually kids can be actually very, very honest, very forthcoming because it's visible. It's visible to everyone what's going on, but to have them articulated is another level of engagement.
I love that, and the collective aspect of physical education, I think, is just such a model for the rest of us in general. But that is very different from the individualistic, hyper-competitive, inequitable system in which we live. Actually, other parts of the school really do celebrate that in so many ways. Um, I've kind of fallen into this assessment nerd shtick of mine, but I mean, while we're at it, let's bring this back to our assessment obsessed audience here at TG2. In your book, you mention at different points your aspiration to be a listener, to be a better audience, to be curious as opposed to incurious. It is a thing to be incurious, as you say in one of your essays. And I saw those themes coming up in your essay, Making Awesome the Standard. And I was really taken by those awesome gym days. Could you briefly describe what awesome gym days are? And what are some of the insights that came out of writing that piece for you?
Okay. Awesome Gym Day is an institution at my school, and I did not create it. It came from my longtime colleague, Patty Richards, who was a PE, an elementary PE veteran, and we started at the same time. So I was part-time and she was full-time. And she was the person who really introduced me to elementary PE that is fun, that it's engaging, that is that speaks to kids. And so that was something that she began as a sort of incentive program. So it was sort of a reward system that kids could sort of earn this opportunity to have a play day in the gym, and that included using the rings, the gymnastic rings that we would bring down from the ceiling, and the rope ladders and the climbing ropes, and we would have we would maybe put up monkey bars, and also bring out scooters and stilts and soccer balls, and so really, everything that that a child's PE heart might desire, um, and then the kids would have maybe 20-25 minutes to play.
Mm.
So their choice, so free choice to go and do, all of these different things or just one thing with whomever they chose.
Right.
And yeah, so that's a thing. And by now it's an institution.
And so you said that you kind of wrestled with that piece, and I'm wondering what are some of the insights that came out of that as you were thinking about that institution of awesome gym days, and what it tells us about assessment and your goals as a teacher.
Well, when you originally asked me to write about assessment, one of my first responses was, "Ooh, I am like the worst person to talk about assessment because I don't love it. I don't love report cards, except for the comments. I do like to write the comments, like the private, but the whole, like, okay, here are the indicators and so on. I just think, I don't know, I feel that I'm not always convinced of what I'm doing there and that it's serving students in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. It's all right. But, and also just because I think I'm not very good at gathering the data, right, that I would need to be able to indicate, yes, this child is doing well in manipulative skills. The child's object control skills are fine, but that's a big thing. Anyway, so that was one struggle I had. That's one struggle I have with assessment. Given that, I also don't feel very comfortable pontificating on assessment because I think I'm not very good at it. So as I started to wrestle with it, folks should know that this started out as a letter to Arthur because that was the best way that I could write it in a way that felt like, oh, I'm not going to be shunned by my colleagues and curriculum director if I write this.
Right.
So thank you, Arthur, for sort of adjusting it so that it was for a wider audience. But it was just very personal because it was realizing that, wait a minute, I do assess. I know that it's happening, but it's not a check. It's not a checklist. It's not easily quantifiable. It doesn't help me if a kid can kick a ball to the wall 12 times in a row, and that helps no one. And I think as a department that I work with colleagues who get that and who appreciate that, and so like I've been able to sort of settle down and recognize that Awesome Gym Day is the thing that demonstrates that what we're doing is working for kids and because of kids, right? Because the kids enjoy it and they engage. I mean, they do not waste a moment of Awesome Gym Day. Really, no moment is wasted.
Yeah. It's just hard to measure. It's hard to quantify. It's hard to capture. And that just is, I would say that's a problem everywhere, but it's probably most obvious in some of these subject areas that have been pretty resistant to imposing measurable things onto it, which is great in so many ways. In that piece that you wrote, I remember something from your book again that I'd like to revisit if that would be okay with you. Your essay, Letting Go of School to Think About Education. It invites the reader to explore what would be possible if we did that. And I'm looking at a passage at the end of page 161. What if?
Oh,
Would you mind reading that for us?
sure. What if, instead of trying to produce good or even excellent students, we aimed more for empowering excellent people, outstanding citizens, valuable community members? What if we created learning centers where people of various ages could gather to pursue purpose, challenge, and connection with each other
Mm,
in meaningful ways? What if learning remained part and parcel of living every day, and we acknowledged and recognized that publicly and privately?
mm, I love that so much.
Whew,
I
man.
personally feel, am I right in saying that you see a glimmer of that in Awesome Gym Days? And I just wonder, how can we expand that or make progress toward that vision?
I had just such a wonderful response from a colleague of mine to my article. I sent it to a few folks, and he's a high school math teacher, and he mentioned the thought of thinking about the fact that his students do come to the classroom thinking very much about how they are going to be assessed,
Mhm,
and how can he work sort of against that, like understanding, yes, this is
mhm,
the context, but also, what might an awesome gym day look like in that context?
mhm.
And I thought, wow, how generous, how
Mhm,
generous is that for this person to think, wait a minute, what possibilities might I have to connect with students and to connect them to the subject matter differently in a way that's joyful, that's playful, that is, um, also about their agency and their choice.
mhm,
Um, and from an area where it is the most quantifiable, right? Math,
mhm,
it's
mhm.
our,
It
like,
involves
most
numbers.
field of practice.
Mhm,
And so that for me was such a huge compliment, such a huge compliment. And
mhm,
and and again, it shows me that we are capable. We are capable of thinking differently, but sometimes we need nudges, we need impulses, and usually those impulses need to come from outside of our context.
mhm,
From a different field of
mhm.
practice, from a different area. And so I think that's something that's inspired me
Yeah.
in my writing, and it's been my reading, right? So I'm reading from all over the place,
Mhm.
um, and that's helped me a lot.
Yeah, you really model that for us in so many ways in your reading and your writing, bringing together all those threads. I personally feel, and I wonder if you would agree, that physical education and the arts, I'm actually associated with our essential arts program here, technical education as well, are going to have to be the ones leading that charge. Unfortunately, in so many cases, the so-called core subject areas have sold out to this impulse to measure and quantify and capture everything. Do you think that's possible? I feel, I know my essential arts colleagues, we're always trying to pretend like we're as legitimate as the other subject areas, and it really needs to be turned totally upside down, in my opinion.
I
What about, do
I
you think that's true?
I do think that the arts, the performance-based subject areas, it's different. We have it different. And also what we're facing, what the performances that we experience are ephemeral, right?
Mhm.
like I don't unless I videotape every minute, I miss most of the stuff that happens. Most of my kids' learning is not recorded. They know that something happened. So I think that in the arts and in physical education, we're certainly dealing with stuff that just doesn't. It's not there to last, right? We don't have necessarily papers that we go and grade.
Right.
Um, at the same time, I do want to cut my colleagues in the other areas a little more slack,
Mhm.
um, in that I'm not sure that it's always their impulse to want to quantify, but
Mhm.
they are being reinforced
Mm,
by systems in which we are all embedded, right? Just education systems writ large that
yes.
are still very much about hierarchies and
Hmm.
measurement and ranking and all of those things. And it's a very competitive model of education in which, we are all participating, whether we choose to
Hmm.
or not. So I do recognize that those pressures exist and
Yes.
that many folks are having to just sort of work with what they got.
Right.
Um, and so, but yes, I do think that there are things that we can learn from the arts, from physical education. But I also think that it would be great if all of our disciplines could be much more in dialogue with each other and
Right.
stop having to prove ourselves to each other. I
Absolutely.
think that would be great. If we could get away from sort of the competitive nature of of importance and significance, and um, talk to kids, and they will tell you what's important to them. And sometimes it's all of our subjects and none of them.
Hmm.
True story. I live with a
Absolutely.
teenager, so I'm also feeling that very strongly.
Right. So I've got one more question. And
Okay.
leading up to the interview, you told me to ask you for an assessment story from your school days. So tell us the story.
Okay, the assessment story, I believe, from high school, senior year, we had an elective course. Oh, I am hard pressed to think of the title of it, but it was one for which I wrote an essay on which I got some ridiculous grade, 100.9. So my teacher, Mr. Lawrence, was so impressed with my essay, which incorporated song lyrics, one song from Billy Joel, one song from James Taylor, and one song from Steely Dan. And this was to illustrate the alienation of man, right?
Mhm,
Okay, sure.
mhm,
Uh, as as you do, right? Let me just say this. I also went to a private day school outside of Cleveland. It was a co-ed. So this was definitely college prep atmosphere, totally. Um, and he was so excited by that. And actually I was asked to read this essay to the class aloud.
mm.
I'm not kidding. And I guess I was kind of shocked and proud, and it was, but I still have that essay.
Wow.
I have it. It's there, and I remember so strongly because I was sort of, and of course I wasn't thinking, well, look at me, like
Mhm,
one of the two black girls in my class of
mhm.
100, uh, you know, bringing down the 100.9 in an English course. Like, look at me. So yeah, but now, I look at that, I think that's weird. But okay, but there it is. That is my assessment story.
Yeah, I hope I wasn't triggering you by asking you to read from your book, or if that brought
No,
that up for you. No,
that was a
but,
good one. It was a happy
yeah.
ending, yeah.
No, that's something to be proud of. I mean, I think grades can be that for us sometimes. They can be kind of an encouragement. But so we have some time for questions. I think people are just reveling in what you have to say right now. But I'll give them a couple minutes here. Um, Sherri, can you let our audience know where they can find you and what's next for you?
Okay, you can find me on Twitter, and almost all the time. And Twitter is kind of like my living room, so at
Mhm,
Edified Listener. Um, and my newsletter, Bending the Arc, does come out monthly.
mhm,
And I love doing that. That's something that I really have enjoyed because I enjoy curating, and
yeah,
this was a great way to get me to curate and also be selective. Like, you can't share everything, you gotta just pick and choose.
right.
Um, and what's next? I have a couple of keynotes coming up, one of which,
Great.
and both of them are in May. They're like a week apart. One of them is at the OTESA conference, which is a Canadian organization.
Mhm.
Let's see, Open Technology in Education Society and Scholarship Association. That's it. That's
Wow.
OTESA. And yes, I will be one of the keynote speakers, and I am just thrilled
Mm.
at that opportunity. And the other one is the upcoming ECIS, which is a European, I think it's the European Collaborative of International Schools, something, or Education
Okay.
Collaborative of International Schools. So it's close to that. And their PE section is having a conference, and hopefully we will be able to be in person in Frankfurt. And I am one of the keynote speakers there. So
Wow.
I really don't know what to do with that sort of sense of like, really, y'all want to talk? Well, y'all want to listen to me? But I look forward to the challenge because I do enjoy thinking about participatory
Mhm.
keynotes. Yeah.
That's great. That is great. Okay, we will include all that in the show notes, so please follow up. And even if you didn't win a book, do yourself a favor and buy it. It's Care at the Core by Sherri Spelic. And Sherri, it's been a delight to talk to you today, and I hope that we will one day have a chance to meet in person. Thank you so much for
So,
taking the time to join us today.
thank you so much for having me, Arthur, and thank you all of you who turned out live. I'm just so honored. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. Be safe.
At this point, we invite you to continue the conversation with Sherri Spelic in the Zoom after party. And you can join us for some more in this more free form and intimate setting by becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/gradeless. I'm also putting these comments in here as we go. Once you have selected your membership level, you will see the Zoom link to join at this time. Once again, we would like to thank our Patreons for their generous support of our work. That's it for now. We hope to see you soon in the after party. If you are one of our winners from our drawing today, we'll be in touch soon. Thank you for joining, and be sure to stay tuned for the next installment of TG2Chat Live.